Greetings Wargamers, today I'm going to be showing you how to make some more advanced versions of our urban ruins. In last week's video I showed you how to take some blue foam and other simple materials to make really basic urban ruins to get plenty of terrain on your table really quickly. This week I'm going to be showing you how to take those simple ruins that we made, add lots of detail to them and really elevate how cool they look. So let's head over to the bench and get started. So we're going to start by cutting out some new walls. Now if you check the link below you'll find a PDF template that we used in last week's video to make our basic ruins, and there's also an additional page that has these pieces on it. Now cut them out following exactly the same techniques that we used last week, except for on this circle here. What I did for this was I cut out a square in the centre of the circle and then cut out sections as close to the edge as I could get, then used a very sharp knife to trace a line around the circle, and then holding my blade flat against the edge of the circle I went round and shaved off the pieces to form the circle. Once everything was cut out, I came in with some 150 grit sandpaper and sanded the edges just to get them a little bit smoother. So last week I showed you how to add some bullet hole weathering using either a drill or a cocktail stick, and we did that by just pressing the stick in, rotating it slightly to widen the gap, and then just tearing at the edges of the foam. This gives a really good rough look, but if you want something that looks a little more precise, what you can do is pop your cocktail stick in, rotate it ever so slightly, and then come in with your knife and make very, very shallow stabs into the foam. And what this will do, it'll create some lines. You probably won't be able to see them on camera, but you can then come in and widen them with your cocktail stick and remove any material. And if you compare the two, you can see that what you should hopefully see, turn it around and get some shadow on there. There we go. So you can see that that one is quite rough and quite broken, but this one is quite clean. And then from it you can extend those lines. If they're close to an edge, you can extend them and add in a crack. I'm just going to go on, add a couple of bullet holes, and then I'm going to come back and show you an advanced method of distressing our foam. If you want to take your weathering to the next level, there is little better than using a rotary tool. Now, this is not a branded one. Most people would use a Dremel or something similar. This does exactly the same thing. It just spins bits very, very quickly and has a chuck on it so that you can add a variety of different bits. I'll add a link in the description below to where you can get this exact model. It's quite cheap, comes with a lot of bits, and is really useful for lots of different wargaming related things. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a variety of bits to add some battle damage. We're going to start with a cutting bit, hopefully. I just need to change the chuck to take the cutting bit. So to do that I just hold this button here and unscrew the cover, take out the chuck, put a different one in, screw the cover back on, pop in my cutting bit and then screw it until it's tight. And what we're going to do with this, I'm going to set it to a low speed, so we're just going to set it to 1 to begin with, and then I'm just going to use it to make gashes in the foam. So you can see, it moves quite slowly. To increase the speed of it, this might get quite noisy. and you can see here that it's added a nice clean gouge. And if I turn it back on, I can extend that line a little bit. By just going with a shallower cut on either end. Now you can use this to actually cut out sections of your foam. I'll grab a scratch piece here and just show you. Yeah. It cuts through the foam quite easily. If you're using quite shallow foam, say 6mm, you'll probably get away with cutting through the entire depth of the foam. And it leaves quite a clean and flat cut because it's a power tool. I wouldn't recommend cutting out complex shapes with this, but if you want to cut pieces into rubble really quickly, it could be an option if you don't have a hot wire cutter. The next piece, the next end that we're going to use, if I can pull that off, is probably the most versatile of all the bits, and it is the sanding drum. It's just a small piece of sandpaper on a small drum, and obviously when you turn it on, you're left with a power sander. So we'll use that, and we'll use it to just shape the edges of our foam. You want to wear a respirator when you're doing this. I'm not going to wear one right now because you won't be able to hear me speak, but when you're doing this at home, work in a well ventilated area, and wear a respirator because the small little particles that this kicks off are not good for your lungs. So just turn it on and just come in and now you can see that it is beveling our edge, but it's also tearing a little bit. The reason for that is the speed isn't high enough, so I'm just going to pop the speed up to 3. And you see that it creates a nice bevel. Now this tool is really handy for making bases, and it's what I'll be using later on to make the base for this ruin. And you can use it for all sorts of things. You can use it for battle damage. You just come in at random angles and you'll see that it takes out a wedge. The only downside to that is because it is a sander, it sands those edges smooth, so you don't get quite nice an effect as you do when you use a bit like this. Now this is a small engraving tool, and what it is a tiny little ball that's rough on the end, and you use it to engrave metals and things like that. But we can use it, I'll just turn the speed down a little, to create craters and battle damage in our foam. So we just come in and just drag lines into the foam. Turn up the speed. And you can see there that it's created a lot of gouges. Now, you can either leave it like that, or just come in with a small wire brush to get rid of the excess. And then what I like to do is just come in with your knife and score at the edges. Turn in the pieces you do, like so. And take your cocktail stick and just drag it down, widening those marks. Like so. Then just clean off the excess with your wire brush. And what you're left with is a really nice, I'll just put some shadow on it, is a really nice looking sort of crater in your foam. We're going to use techniques similar to this in a future video to make actual craters on the ground for your foam. But this works really well for battle damage from, say, a tank shell or a rocket or something similar. And just to finish it off, I'm just going to add a few cracks emanating from it using zigzag lines with my craft knife. Remember, when you're creating cracks, always go to the edge of the piece to make it as realistic looking as possible, and then just widen them with my cocktail stick. And here I'm just going to tear out the foam that's broken. You can see there's a really nice effect. So I'm going to carry on. I'm going to weather all of this, including the edges, using the method we covered in last week's video, and then we'll glue it together, and once it's all glued together we'll come back and we'll start adding our additional details. So once your piece is glued together, the next step is to add some relief details. The front of these ruins are very flat and very boring, so what we're going to do is we're going to add some cornices and some corner pieces. And to do that, I've taken some 6mm foam and I've cut them into roughly 1 centimetre strips. I've not been worried too much about being exact here because we are going to add additional weathering to these. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by gluing one of the strips running along the seam side, and what that'll do is it'll make that seam slightly less obvious. Then I'm going to come in with another strip and cover up that seam line. So beginning with this one, I'm just going to take some of my glue, again using Everbuild here, but use whatever brand you're most comfortable with. Just avoid craft glues because they're already watered down and don't hold as well. So I'm just going to come in and wipe a bit of the excess off so it doesn't get all over my cutting mat. But I'm just going to line it up here, turn it on its side to make it easier. Turn it around for you so you can see, to make it easier there. And I'm going to use an offcut if I can find one. That piece will do, just to square up the bottom. And I'm going to come in with my pins. Try not to stab myself and pin it in. And then keeping it square, do the same around the middle, and then do the same on the top. On the top one I've pushed it in quite a bit further to make sure there's enough pressure there for the glue to set up properly. You can see on the bottom it's come out the side. Again, it won't leave a large hole, so I'm not too worried about that. As you can see, it adds a nice bit of detail. And then we'll come in on the other side. This will be a little bit trickier because of the pins, so I might push them into a uniform depth, like so, here like that. And we're going to come in and do exactly the same thing. So take our glue and run a bead all the way up, like so. I'm going to stand this piece up because I can't lay it down properly. And then again, use an offcut to try and square it up. It can be a little bit difficult because of the pins, but just do your best. And then again, come in with a pin and pop it into the foam. Have it stuck out a little bit, again not too much of a problem. And get another pin here and find the top. I want that to go into the meat of the polystyrene, so just change the angle a little. You can see here, well hopefully you can see, this hasn't gone up square. I'm going to take the pin out, square it back up, and try and hold it in place this time whilst applying my pin. This doesn't need to be perfect, but the neater you can be here, the better result you're going to get. So again, come in here and just pop a pin in. And what that does, adds a nice corner piece. What we're going to do is just fill in this gap with some PVA glue. I'm not sure whether you'll be able to see the gap on camera because it's a little bit blown out. My camera doesn't enjoy filming on this green background all that much. It's always trying to correct the colours and it blows out the light because of it. But we just put some PVA glue in, run along with our finger, and I'm just going to wipe the excess off my finger and then come back in with a paper towel and just smooth that out like so. Trying to wipe off as much of this as possible so it doesn't leave any on the foam, just like that. And then I'm going to try and make a flat part and come in and take it out of the corners as well, just so that we don't end up with a bead of dry glue. And then I'm going to do the same on the side piece here. For this, I'm going to line up my template in the same way, get that on camera, line up my template as best I can, and then just make a couple marks with my pen, just so I've got a rough idea of where to place it. And then come back in with another piece, take our glue again, run some glue up, trying to gauge how high we need to go, that'll do. Press it in place. I'm just going to turn it towards me to get it nice and square. Apply some pressure on the glue and then come in with our pins and pin it through. For this one the pins are going to go all the way through, but I'm not concerned about that because I want this to be a nice strong bond. And I'm going to put 3 pins on here, like so. And then just come in and wipe away the excess again. And I'll also just wipe away the excess from here. What we're going to do now is we're going to leave this to dry, and then once it's dry and attached, we'll come in and we'll cut off where it's sticking out over the top and blend it into the piece. While our corner piece is dry, we're going to add in our window sills. Now, doing this achieves 2 things. It adds some more detail and texture to your piece by having additional elements, but it also helps hide some of your crimes with the bottoms of the windows. If you can see on the bottoms of most of these windows there's some tear out, and adding some windowsills really helps hide that. And to do this we're going to be using balsa wood. Now balsa wood is a very soft wood. It takes texture really well. It's really easy to cut along the grain, a little more difficult to cut across the grain. So when you're cutting thick pieces of it, these are 3mm pieces, and cutting across the grain was a little bit difficult with a knife, so you may want to use a razor saw. But all we're going to do is we're just going to take our pieces, roughly measure out the width of our window, like so, and then come in with our ruler and just make our cut. You can see how easy that is. Now on this particular piece of balsa, there's one side is slightly better than the other, so we're going to put the best side facing front. But first we're going to take our wire brush and just drag it in the direction of the grain 3 or 4 times over the piece, and this is going to add a really nice wood grain texture. There's already a little bit of texture on there anyway, but because the wood is so soft, it often gets obscured by paint. So if we just come in with our wire brush, give it a few passes, probably won't be able to see it on camera, but it is very noticeable up close. And then all we're going to do is going to bring our piece back in, knock over our glue, make a mess everywhere, and then just put a dab of glue down, and then turn this so you can see it. Just going to place the shelf in and just wedge it down. Well, like that. I like to put them so that they're flush with the styrofoam at the back, and then what you end up with is a little bit of a lip. I cut these shells at 12mm wide and the foam is 10, so you end up with about 2mm of a lip, and the result looks great. It adds another level of detail and it really helps elevate your piece. So next what we're going to do is add in both of them and move on to the next step of detailing. With the windowsills added, the next step is to carve the support sections on the corners and running up the middle. To do this, I just took a sharp knife and trimmed off the excess along the top, and then I came in on the corners and along the edges, chipping off small pieces to add some battle damage. With that done, I came back in with my knife and textured those newly cut pieces by scoring in multiple directions and then dragging my blade over and hitting it with a wire brush to really roughen up the texture. Once all the texture was added, I wanted to add even more detail to our ceiling pieces, so I took some of the small square mesh that we've been using in previous videos, cut off a few sections and then inserted that into the ceiling pieces to give the effect of exposed rebar hanging out of the ceiling. With basic construction complete, it was time to move on to basing. To do this, I cut out a piece of foamed PVC, which is also known as Sintra in the US or Foamex in the UK. I cut it to shape, used a rotary tool to bevel the edges, and then hit it with some sandpaper on the top to roughen the texture to help the glue adhere. Then I applied a layer of PVA glue to the bottom of all of our ruins, as well as a few dabs of super glue. Now the super glue is there just to tack the ruin in place on the base while the PVA glue dries. Once the ruins were all glued down, it was time to move on to texturing the base. To do this, I applied a layer of PVA glue all over the piece and then used a variety of different sized stones and grit and sand. I started with larger stones and offcut pieces of foam in the corners and then moved out to finer sand elsewhere. Once I had added all the basing material to the base itself, I added some glue into the corners on the upper sections of the ruins and applied some fine grit there to give the impression that rubble from the ceiling and the walls above had collected in those corners. And then you just need to leave that to dry and then paint it up, and we'll be painting it in a future video. So that's everything for today, and now you know how to add little bits to your basic ruins to make them look that much better. And I'll put some footage of the completed piece here now so you can get some round shots of it, and as you can see, it adds a lot of detail. Just add in those corner pieces
and a few uprights, adding in the window sills and then adding in some rebar on the broken floors goes a long way to adding lots of detail into your piece, and it makes it much more interesting to look at both structurally and when it comes to painting, because you'll have much more detail to pick up with your dry brushing and your highlights.
And there you have it. You can see how with some basic materials and really easy techniques we can elevate those basic ruins into something really cool looking. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like below because it really helps us out, and make sure to leave a comment letting us know what you thought of the video. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We release new Wargaming content every Friday and you can click up here to subscribe. And if you want to keep watching, you can see last week's video right here. Until next time, happy Wargaming.